It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and we are at the first official weekend of the 21st century, January 7th, 2000. And what better way to celebrate a new century by taking a look at some leftover films from the last year that we didn't get to look at. I have the list right here. We've already talked about what we're going to talk about here. We have a lot of films to get to here. I'm wasting your time already, but we have a lot to get to. Let's just jump on into it. We're going to try to be quick on these. I'm going to try to be quick on these. So let's start off with the first movie we have here, and that is Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. So as I mentioned, this is based off of Jane Austen's best-selling wicked comedy, as they call it in this film. You have Fanny Price, who goes to live at Mansfield Park, the estate of her aunt's husband, Sir Thomas. Clever, studious, and a writer of an ironic imagination and fine moral compass, she becomes essentially close to Edmund, Thomas's younger son. Fanny is soon possessed of beauty as well as a keen mind and comes to the attention of a neighbor, Henry Crawford. Thomas promotes this match, but to his displeasure, Fanny has a mind of her own, asking Henry to prove himself worthy, as Edmund courts Henry's sister, and as light shines on the link between Thomas's fortunes and New World slavery, Fanny must assist Henry's character and assert her heart as well as her wit. Basically, Miramax trying to capture the same lightning in a bottle that Sense and Sensibility did a couple of years prior to this, and Emma, but those films I think were much better compared to this film. It's not a bad movie per se. It does have some elements to it that are kind of fun, and it does depart from the original novel in a lot of respects. Like, the life of Jane Austen is actually incorporated into this film, as well as the ideas of slavery and West Indian plantations. And it makes for a very interesting film, a film that kind of works mostly because of the performances by the leading actors, Embeth Davidtz, Johnny Lee Miller, Alessandro Nivola, Frances O'Connor. Just a really good cast overall here. Not one of the best adaptations of a Jane Austen story, but definitely worth it if you want to see. If you like Emma and Sense and Sensibility, I think you definitely can get a kick out of this one. Nothing more to say about that one. That's Mansfield Park. So on to our next movie, and that is Pirates of Silicon Valley. So coming about 16 years before Danny Boyle's Steve Jobs, which is a really good film. I've talked about that a couple times, but this is a story spanning between the years of 1971 to 1997. It's based off the book Fire in the Valley, The Making of the Personal Computer, and it shows the rivalry between Steve Jobs, played by Noah Wyle, and Bill Gates, played by Anthony Michael Hall, through Apple and Microsoft, and the development of the personal computer. And while it certainly doesn't have the same great elements I think are in Steve Jobs, the biopic, I think this is a well-done movie. It's a really good film showing two really good performances by Michael Hall and Noah Wyle as Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. It really is worth it just to see these two performances going off on one another. And there is a lot of interesting history between these two that you really don't see coming until you actually look into a lot of the information that this movie tries to give you. It's interesting that this director didn't direct anything for almost 20 years before he took this movie. And I keep forgetting that this was the time when TNT had a number of different original movies. We're going to get to a couple of them as we got this list right here, but definitely worth a watch. I won't say it's better than the Steve Jobs movie. It's kind of interesting we never got a Bill Gates movie, too. I feel like that could have been something that could be very interesting to see in movie form, but this will do just fine for now. It's definitely worth a watch. I'd say watch Steve Jobs first, then watch Pirates of Silicon Valley, but I'd say check them both out because they are definitely worth it, but avoid the Ashton Kutcher Steve Jobs movie. For the love of God, please avoid that one. So that's Pirates of Silicon Valley. We'll get to some more TNT originals in just a little bit here. But we got a couple of direct-to-video animated films. Apparently they're very popular when I do these videos. So here's one of the first ones I noticed right away. Our Friend Martin. So this is a story about a black teenager named Miles who goes on a class field trip at the museum to learn about what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did for humanity. He thinks that he'd rather play baseball, but the trip turns into this exciting adventure when he and his best friend Randy, who's white, are sent back in time meeting Dr. Martin Luther King at several points during his life. And this is a film that could have easily been too preachy for its own good, but man, this was actually kind of a really good film. And it's interesting because this comes from Dick Animation, and they're usually not the best in terms of like telling good stories and all that. I think the one great storytelling animated series they ever did was the Sonic Sat AM series from the 1990s, which coincidentally Jaleel White is actually in here playing Martin Luther King Jr. at the age of 15, and he's actually played by several people in this movie. Dexter King at 34, and then LeVar Burton at age 27. and like I said, you're going through all these different bits of history. This has a big cast to it. Like, you wouldn't tell from that trailer alone, but you got Robert Richard, who was on, I think he was on One-on-One, if I'm not mistaken, the UPN show from the 2000s, and also on Cousin Skeeter. Lucas Black, who went on to become a big actor in the Fast and Furious films. Ed Asner, who went on to be on the Boondocks, and many other things after that. Angela Bassett, Danny Glover, Whoopi Goldberg, Samuel L. Jackson, James Earl Jones, Ashley Judd, Richard Kind, Yolanda King, Susan Sarandon, John Travolta, Oprah Winfrey. I mean, they got a big cast for this. They were really proud of this movie, and you know what? They deserve it, because it is a very interesting film. It's not too preachy. It doesn't do what you think it's going to do. It's going to be like but it actually keeps you invested throughout the course of the movie and seeing where they're going to go with all these places that they're going to go to here. And it's a fascinating little film. It's a film that a lot of people probably don't know about unless you watch these videos back in the day and saw that preview. I saw this preview a lot when I was watching stuff from 20th Century Fox in 1999, but in 98 as well. But yeah. It's definitely worth the watch. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. I mean, it's definitely going to be worth the watch. And it's one of those few little surprises. You might actually be pleasantly surprised by what you have here. But so that's our friend Martin. Now let's get to another direct-to-video animated film that I didn't even know even existed until it came out that day. And that is Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein. So kind of what happened around this time period. Alvin and the Chipmunks, the TV series, had been off the air for almost 10 years now, but it was still living on through reruns on Nickelodeon and then later Cartoon Network. And then around this time, Universal actually picked up the rights to do more Alvin and the Chipmunks projects, starting with the release of the Chipmunk Adventure on video a couple years before this. And this film literally came out of nowhere. I remember walking into a Suncoast Video in 1999 when we had it here at the Monroeville Mall. It was just like, that's a time capsule right there. If there's still Suncoast Videos out there, but there might be one or two, but not as much as they were back then. But I remember walking in there and I saw a new Alvin and the Chipmunks movie, and I had no idea it was even coming out. So we picked it up, and I remember watching it for the first time around that time period. And the concept here is basically what you think it is. Alvin and the Chipmunks, they're working at this theme park, and one of the new people that comes in is Dr. Frankenstein and his monster, which is Frankenstein's monster. Most people don't know that Frankenstein is not really the monster in the name of the monster. That's actually the name of the doctor, Victor Frankenstein, and the monster doesn't have a name at all. Like, it's a weird situation right there. But so basically, Dr. Frankenstein figures that the castle isn't scary enough and recreates the real Frankenstein, and after the monster finds the boys, it starts a wild and wacky adventure. And I gotta say, if you ever loved the Alvin and the Chipmunks cartoon from the 1980s, you pretty much get everything you see here as well. The twist, of course, being that Frankenstein now exists in the Chipmunk universe. I guess what they were trying to do are the obvious parodies of stuff like the Abbott and Costello monster crossovers back in the day. But let's dissect some of the best aspects and some of the worst aspects here. On the plus side, it's the same Alvin and the Chipmunks from the classic cartoons. They're not modernized for the kids of today. They're not doing topical jokes or targeting down to the minuscule level of what's relevant or popular at the time, unlike the Fox movies. But then again, there's not that much that this movie does that excels, which isn't a bad thing per se. The movie itself is mostly completely harmless. It's a fun idea, basically having a bizarre idea, having Frankenstein meet Alvin and the Chipmunks. Though to be fair, the next movie they would do would be much more different than I think anybody would have expected. But let's talk about some of the negatives. The story makes no sense whatsoever. It starts off with a black and white sequence where the Doctor and his Frankenstein monster are being chased out by villagers. So it's safe to say this part takes place in the time period of the original Frankenstein films. That's fine. But then the Doctor just shows up in 1999 California, arriving at the theme park with his monster. So is the Doctor a Highlander because he left the village? Did he kill the last Highlander to live forever? Because as we know, there can be only one. But and by the way, what town is this? It looks like a town from the village, and the people just are living in that same time period where the rest of the world has aged with time because they are afraid of a red monster living out in the woods. It makes no sense how this works, and what's worse, the film never explains how this is even possible. You're just supposed to go along with it, go along for the ride, and you need to explain this to how this whole thing works. Plus, when you talk about a Saturday morning cartoonishly evil bad guy, this Doctor is clearly that. Nearly every single line in this movie is something sinister or evil coming out of his mouth. He's literally talking to people and asking them, do you have kidneys or organ donors? Like, how does nobody know that this guy is evil? And the animation is very, very off. If you've seen this film, you see that Dave looks way too much like John Stamos from Full House. Like, he literally looks like Uncle Jesse. It's just like, there are some nice touches to the animation. Like, there's a bit in there where they're on this the chipmunks are on this roller coaster, and as the car keeps going faster and faster, they resort back to their older renditions, like the older 50s chipmunks and the 60s chipmunks. Like, the movie does have a little bit of a sense of humor to it with stuff like that, but it's about as harmless as you can get. There's nothing really about it that's offensively bad. It's just, it does have a problem with the villain and the story structure, and the animation, few and far between. It doesn't really work as well, but it's a fun movie to watch around Halloween. Not a great film, but believe me, like, I would rather take these movies than anything that came after with the live-action films any day of the week. So, let's talk about a good animated film that came out in 1991 on video, Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost. So this was the second direct-to-video film that they did with the Scooby-Doo gang after Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island turned out to be a big success. And the story here is that you have the gang traveling to this New England town in Oak Haven after being invited by this horror writer played by Tim Curry. And like a number of different direct-to-video films released around this time, this movie uses real ghosts instead of simple bad guys in masks, giving the film a darker tone. And technically, this film was supposed to not be that way. It was supposed to be like a typical Scooby-Doo adventure, but they actually had to force it. It's like after what happened with Zombie Island, how successful that was, they said, let's do it with this. And it shows in terms of the third act, which seems kind of tacked on, but it does lead to a pretty good twist that you don't really see coming. But like I said, the film follows up on the similar setup of Zombie Island with a real ghost instead of traditional simple bad guys, and it does give that movie that's darkest tone. I still think Zombie Island, can be easily seen as the darkest Scooby-Doo movie ever made. For example, like you have the Scooby-Doo song by Third Eye Blind in Zombie Island, which is pretty good, and then you have Billy Ray Cyrus doing this. 1999 Billy Ray Cyrus, by the way, smack dab in the middle, past the achy breaky heart era and pre-Hannah Montana era. I mean, okay, to be perfectly honest, it's not the worst thing, but to go from Third Eye Blind to Billy Ray Cyrus, talk about going in the complete opposite direction with the theme. And as far as the film itself goes, it's still a really good film. The animation's still really good. The voice casting once again works really well. Like, I swear they wanted to get Jeff Goldblum for Ben Ravencroft, but they basically said, we'll go with Tim Curry, which is nothing wrong with that per se, especially since Tim Curry gets to go peak Tim Curry at the end. This film is most notable, though, for the introduction to the Hex Girls, who would later become supporting characters in the Scooby-Doo universe, and they have lasting power, and you can definitely see why. They are likable people. You do like seeing them around with these characters, and they do make sense to live in this universe, and they keep the idea of, let's take the Scooby-Doo formula and make it real ghosts instead of these guys in masks. It's everything you can expect from these newer Scooby-Doo films when coming out at the time, but it's certainly not as good as Zombie Island, but it's still quite enjoyable enough. I can't recommend this one enough. Definitely check out Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost. So let's move on to our next film that we have here, and that is George Orwell's Animal Farm. So this is, not surprisingly, based off of the George Orwell classic novel about a satire of Stalinist Russia. The story takes place on the revolts of the animals of Manor Farm against their human masters. Led by the pig Trotsky, the pig Snowball, and Napoleon, who are supposed to be Trotsky and Stalin, the animals attempt to create a utopian society. Soon, however, Napoleon gets a taste of power, drives out Snowball, and establishes a totalitarian regime as brutal and corrupt as any human society. Manor Farm becomes a world where animals are equal, but some are more equal than others, and you would think this would make for a good movie. And yeah, watching that trailer in full, you'll be wondering to yourself, what the hell did I just watch? Because they took one of the most well-known satirical, allegorical novels of all time and just butchered it on so many levels. They watered it down so it could appeal to families and kids, along with the adults, but that was not the intended purpose of the story. They took the predictable route for the story, simplifying it, dumbing it down, and the effects works. You expect a lot more from Jim Henson's Creature Shop than what I just showed you. I mean, this is unbelievably bad. And it's bad, and what makes it even worse is that you have phenomenal actors in here. Dignified actors like Peter Ustinov as Old Major, Patrick Stewart and Ian Holm, like Kelsey Grammer, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Julia Ormond, Pete Postlethwaite, Paul Scofield. They're bad in this movie too. This is an unbelievable mess of a film. And like there's a way to do this story the way George Orwell intended it. In fact, there was an animated movie that did this back in the 1950s that was far superior and stayed more in tone with the book and didn't water itself down to appeal to families. Not to mention have some really good Disney-style animation for the time period. Like, if you're going to do this in live-action form, you got to get somebody like the director of The Maze Runner, Wes Ball, or maybe even The Hunger Games, like Francis Lawrence or Gary Ross, or hell, the director of The Revenant and Birdman, Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu. I think he could make a good, darker, PG-13 tone story similar to the book with better effects than in this film. Like, this thing was made with so much, this was a film that had so much potential to it, which for a TNT movie produced by Hallmark, a $23 million budget, is staggering. I mean, I expect a lot better from these people involved, but not a watered-down version of this. Hopefully someday somebody will get the true potential of the story done right in live-action form, but just go watch the animated film if you want to see the best version of Animal Farm out there, but avoid this one like the plague. This is a abysmal mess of a film. Avoid this one badly. So, with that said, let's get back on the more positive side of things by looking at Mickey's Once Upon a Christmas. So what they're not really telling you is that this is more of an anthology film. You have 3 different stories with narrations by Kelsey Grammer. I mean, anytime he's involved with anything, you've got to watch it, even if it's the worst thing ever. I mean, this guy made Money Plane worth watching just for the way he says these lines. But you have 3 different stories here. You have one that's based off the story of Christmas Every Day, which is, of course, the story about how somebody wishes that it was Christmas every day, and every day for a full year, they would keep it would be Christmas Day, and this has been done so many different times. There's never been a true movie version of this storyline, which I really would have liked to see that. Not just I'm not talking about a TV movie. I'm talking about like a theatrical movie release. Like, I can't believe somebody hasn't even tried to do that once. Like, I'm really hoping one day that actually happens. But in that one, you have the story of Huey, Dewey, and Louie basically saying they wish it was Christmas every day, and so every day it's Christmas every day, and they get the same presents, they get the same situations that happen in there, and it gets to the point where they just get so sick and tired of it until they have to realize what the true meaning of Christmas is, and that's how the time loop ends. So after that, we get a story with Goofy and Max, and this time it's set between Goof Troop, the TV series, and the Goofy movie. So this isn't the teenager Max that we see in the Goofy movie, which coincidentally, the sequel, the direct-to-video sequel, An Extremely Goofy Movie, only came out a couple of weeks after this movie came out. So basically, in that one, you have a story where Goofy and Max send a letter to Santa Claus, but Pete basically starts the conversation that Santa Claus isn't really real, and Max has this existential crisis, and Goofy's trying to prove to him that he exists, and he's doing everything he can and then some to prove it to him, and things happen, and then eventually they kind of set it up that in this world he does exist, although you could make the argument they could have done this a little bit better if they didn't make it straight out in the open that he does exist here. It'd be tough to do, but I think that would have handled it better. But I like what they did here. I thought they did a pretty good job with that story. And then the last one they did, which is another story that I can't believe nobody's tried to do in theatrical form, The Gift of the Magi with Mickey and Minnie. Mickey wants to get a gold chain for Minnie on her, and Minnie wants to get Mickey something special, but she doesn't know what to get her. And she's betting everything on this Christmas bonus, which ends up being a fruitcake because of her boss, Mortimer Mouse, which is a nice little callback to the classic cartoons. And then Mickey, who's selling Christmas trees, ends up getting fired by Pete. And so eventually Mickey decides to trade his harmonica for the gold chain. And so we later find out that Minnie gave up her chain to get Mickey get Mickey a case for his harmonica. That was the thing that she wanted to get him, and it follows the story pretty well here, and it works well because these two characters work off each other so well to make that story work. And again, you have the real life couple of Wayne Allwine and Russi Taylor playing these voices. It's just pitch perfect. I mean, it's just pitch perfect the way they handle that, and the movie itself is a really good, fun film. It's one I always go back to at Christmas time. Every year, I go back to this movie, and this one, and even the second one, which isn't as good, but they both kind of hold special places in my heart. I mean, I really like this one a lot. It's one I always go back to every year, and really, it's just worth it when it's all said and done. It's a really solid film. Like I said, it's one I go back to all the time. I can't recommend this one enough. Definitely check it out this holiday season because it's definitely worth the watch. So, Bet you didn't know that Barry Levinson had a film come out in 1999. Apparently it was around November. This is Liberty Heights. So Liberty Heights is the fourth of Levinson's Baltimore films, the other films including Diner, Tin Men, and Avalon. And this is a semi-autobiographical account of his childhood growing up in Baltimore in the 1950s. Portrayed are the racial injustices experienced by both the Jewish and African-American populations. Both of Nate Kurtzman's sons found women prohibited to them. For Van, because he is Jewish and white, and for Ben, because he is white. Their father goes to prison for running a burlesque show with Little Melvin, an African-American and known local drug dealer. And you have a cast that includes Adrian Brody, Ben Foster, Orlando Jones, Bebe Neuwirth, Joe Mantegna, David Krumholtz, Kevin Sussman, Anthony Anderson, Shane West. And it's one that people probably don't know about. And sadly, because it's actually really good. It's one of Barry Levinson's most underrated movies. And it works if you've seen his other films, Diner, Tin Man, Avalon, that series he has. It's a really well-made film, and it's one that I definitely recommend people check out because it's definitely worth a watch. And it shows you how great of a director Barry Levinson can be. Again, he needed this after Spear was a huge misfire on so many different levels, and he really wouldn't come back to form again for a little bit after this. But it's a really good film. I definitely recommend checking it out. It's an underrated little gem from his. Definitely watch it. It's worth it. So with that said, let's go back to Christmas. 1999 gave us A Christmas Carol with Patrick Stewart. Yet another TNT movie. This is basically, really, do I need to say what the story of A Christmas Carol is at this point? But it's basically that, except it's Patrick Stewart as Ebenezer Scrooge and Richard E. Grant as Bob Cratchit. You also have Joel Grey in here playing the Spirit of Christmas Past. This is basically a film that was made solely after Patrick Stewart did a series of successful one-man shows of A Christmas Carol on Broadway and in London. And I don't really talk about it on this channel, but I love A Christmas Carol. It's one of my all-time favorite stories. I'm a sucker for any adaptation of the story. And really, there's a lot of different versions that I do really like. There are ones that I really don't like. The one that I was shocked that I did not like the most was, of all things, the FX A Christmas Carol. Like, I thought that one, like, you know, FX usually makes a lot of great stuff. You've got Guy Pearce, you've got Stephen Wright and Tom Hardy and Ridley Scott among the executive producers. It's a more darker tone than the original storyline, but it drags like crazy. It is so boring as hell to watch, and it's a shame because I had so much hype finally watching it in 2020, the year after it came out. That one let me down a lot, but this version gives you everything that you expect it to. Patrick Stewart does a great job as Ebenezer Scrooge. I mean, the story overall is very much the classic story of A Christmas Carol, but it's not one of my my favorite versions overall. If I have to pick my 5 favorite versions of A Christmas Story, simply it comes down to the George C. Scott one from '84. That's one I got to watch every year. Mickey's Christmas Carol, of course. What was another one? Bill Murray as Scrooge, a nice modern take on that one. Let me put the list up here so I actually know what I'm talking about here, because I know I'm going to forget some. Jim Carrey's Christmas Carol, the Robert Zemeckis one I really liked, and there was one more. Is it even on here? I'm trying to... Oh, the Muppet Christmas Carol, of course. But like I said, I liked a lot of different Christmas Carol versions. I like a lot of different versions. So, of course, I always got to watch every single one of them. There have been some bad ones, but there have been a lot of good ones. But this one's kind of right in the middle. But Patrick Stewart, I think, was perfectly cast as Ebenezer Scrooge. I think he makes it stand out the most out of everything. But it's a great film. I really do recommend it. So, on to the next movie. Hank Azaria and Jack Lemmon in Tuesdays with Morrie. One of the sappiest movies of all time, but goddammit, I love this movie to death. Based off of Mitch Albom's 1997 novel of the same name. In the film, he's played by Hank Azaria, and he bonds with his former professor, played by Jack Lemmon, who is dying of ALS over a series of visits. And, yeah, like I said, it's one of the most sappiest movies, one of the most emotionally driven movies you will ever see, but I gotta say, man, like, it's hard not to start tearing up at this movie. This is a film that I really, really found myself really enjoying a whole lot, mostly because of those performances by Jack Lemmon and Hank Azaria. Hank Azaria does not get the proper respect I think he deserves. I mean, everyone knows him from The Simpsons, but every time he's tried to do something on his own, it's usually not successful or is is not something like The Smurfs or something like a movie that really devoids him of his true talents. But man, the guy is a really damn good actor, and he has to play against Jack Lemmon in this film, and he just makes it work. You can see why this film swept the Emmys that year, and this is a film that just really was just like I was waiting for this movie to go the route that I thought it was going to go. I thought it was going to go down a route of, okay, here's the cheap emotional moments, and here's and all that. But it doesn't really do that. Every emotion in this movie is earned, and you can just get invested in these dialogues and storylines that these two characters go through throughout the course of the film. That when this moment happens, when when Jack Lemmon's character is no longer there, you really do feel like these emotions are very much earned. It's just like, it's a wonderful movie, man. It's a film that does not get, I don't think gets the proper attention that it deserves, but it's definitely worth a watch. Watch it for Jack Lemmon and Hank Azaria. These are two really great performances from two really solid actors, and probably the last great Jack Lemmon performance you'll see from him, because I think he passed away not too long after this movie came out. Only about a year and a half after this movie came out, but man, he went out with a bang with this one. Tuesdays with Morrie, man. So, should have been not as good as it should have been, but it's definitely worth a watch. Definitely check it out. So let's end this on a high note. Let's go to our last film that we have here, and that is Animaniacs Wacko's Wish. So this, of course, comes just a year and a half after the Animaniacs series finale. The original series ended, basically when Kids WB decided to go all anime with Pokemon success, and basically left shows like Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain left to rot. But basically what happens here is that it relocates all the Animaniacs characters to this 19th century fairy tale world and portrays their race to find this wishing star that will grant them a wish. And it's pretty much what you expect from an Animaniacs movie. It's interesting. I thought at one point they were going to make this into a movie for theaters. I thought that was originally supposed to be the plan, because I could have sworn there was a couple of trailers back when this was in development that they said that this was going to be a theatrical release, and then eventually became a direct-to-video release. But either way, man, this is a really good film. It's everything that you expect from the Animaniacs. The animation is upped a little bit. It's a little too clean for its own good, but in a way, it works to the film's favor. It is a very good film. Nice animation overall. Great songs written by these. It's like the last seeing an old friend again after seeing them off of TV for a little bit here. It was a nice return to form. Everybody's back from here. Everybody from the original cast is back in this. The same people who created it are involved in it. It definitely delivers on everything you can ask for, and then some. The jabs are still there. The comedy is still good. There's even a little bit of good dramatic elements to it. I was actually really surprised at how emotional some parts of this movie got when it really did not need to. But, I mean, not much more I can say about this one, man. If you have not seen Wacko's Wish, definitely seek this one out, because it is definitely worth the watch. Animaniacs Wacko's Wish. Coincidentally, one of the last films released in 1999 in the 20th century. Kind of botched that up at the end, but we finally got through most of the most notable films of the 20th century. We are now heading into the 21st century when we meet next time with the first two big new releases of the new millennium, and that is the sequel to Friday, Next Friday, which features Ice Cube and also introduces Mike Epps to the series, and also Angela Bassett in Supernova. And you can pretty much tell when you see the trailer for Supernova what this movie was intended, is what this pretty much is going to be. But the first two movies of the new millennium, we'll definitely cover those on the next episode. But until then, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, please hit the playlist on the next page. Check out the previous episode. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this. And now I will say, I will see you guys next time for the next video. So until then, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.